Okay, we'll start with the Mangala channel. Om Majnana Timirandasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namah, Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale, Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Datati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Udapadakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha, Sri Rupam Sagaljatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam, Sadvaitam Savadutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha, He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpati, Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste, तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. We continue with this small book titled Beyond Birth and Death. We have already completed the first two chapters. So today we'll continue with chapter 3 titled Liberation from Material Planets. Okay. The jnanis and yogis are generally impersonalists, and although they attain the temporary form of liberation by merging into the impersonal effulgence, the spiritual sky, according to Srimad Bhagavatam, their knowledge is not considered pure. By penances, austerities, and meditations, they can rise up to the platform of the Supreme Absolute. But as has been explained, they again fall down to the material world because they have not taken Krishna's personal features seriously. Unless one worships the lotus feet of Krishna, he again has to descend to the material platform. Okay, in yesterday's Gita class also, we covered the first two verses from chapter 12, Bhakti Yoga. So in the very first verse of chapter 12, Arjuna is actually asking Lord Krishna about which is considered as the topmost form of worship. Is it worshipping your impersonal Brahman feature or performing devotional service unto your personal form? So this was Arjuna's question in the first verse of the 12th chapter, to which the Supreme Lord answers in a very straightforward manner in the very next verse. In the second verse itself, we saw that the Supreme Lord answers the question by saying that by performing devotional service to my personal form. So that is considered as the topmost form of worship. So in the purports we studied yesterday, we saw the categorization between the two main types of transcendentalists. So anyone can answer that? What are the two main types of transcendentalists we saw yesterday in the purport for 12.1 Gita? Anyone?
So is it personality and impersonality?
Yeah. The two main classes of transcendentalists are impersonalists and personalists. So the impersonalists are the ones who worship the impersonal Brahman feature, and the personalists, devotees. The devotees are known as the personalists who worship the personal form of the Supreme Lord. So these are the two main the two main classes of transcendentalists, representing two different schools of thought. So the impersonalists belong to the Mayavadi school of thought, and the personalist devotees belong to the Bhagavata school. But from the authentic scriptures, like Bhagavad Gita, in many parts of the Bhagavad Gita, we can clearly see that the Supreme Lord wants the devotees to worship his personal form. He's saying that in a very straightforward manner, not just in 12.2, but also in many other chapters. And apart from that, in this book, Beyond Birth and Death, we have also seen the reason why it is not very wise for anybody to worship the impersonal Brahman feature. First of all, those who worship the impersonal Brahman feature, they have the desire to merge into the Brahmajyoti. So merging into the Brahmajyoti is not the same as the desire to attain devotional service in the spiritual world. The Brahmajyoti is also a feature of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, but the thought of wanting to merge into the Brahmajyoti is as though wanting to attain an equal status to the Supreme Lord. But our eternal nature, our eternal constitutional position is that since we are the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and we are the separated expansions of the Supreme Lord, so we are always meant to be servants. So originally our nature was that we were servants of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, but due to material contamination, now we are servants of Maya in this material world. No matter whether we are in the spiritual world or in the material world, we will always remain servants, though due to bewilderment by the force of Maya, we tend to think that we are being enjoyous. So it is not possible for us to attain the status which is equal to the Supreme Lord, but the mentality of wanting to merge into the Brahmajyoti is nothing but wanting to attain a status that is similar or equal to the Supreme Lord. So that cannot be considered as liberation, but that will ultimately lead to further entanglement. So we have actually seen the reason why in chapter 2 itself. In chapter 2 of this book, the explanation is given regarding why it is not advisable to worship the impersonal Brahmajyoti feature. So the explanation is given here in these paragraphs. For the impersonalists to get out of this temporary body, Krishna here advises that they vibrate the syllable Om. In this way, they can be assured of transmigration to the spiritual world. However, although they may enter the spiritual world, so even those who worship the Brahmajyoti, even when they merge into the Brahmajyoti, they are also entering the spiritual world. But it is not the same as entering the transcendental abode of the Supreme Lord. Because the devotees who worship the personal form of the Supreme Lord, they get to attain the association with the Supreme Lord in Goloka Vrindavana or in the Vaikuntha planets, but that is not the same as attaining the Brahmajyoti effulgence. So the explanation is given here. Although they may enter the spiritual world, they cannot enter into any of the planets there. So only the devotees who worship the personal form of the Supreme Lord, whether it is the original two-handed Shyamsundara form or whether it is the four-handed Narayana form. So only the devotees, the personalists, can enter into the transcendental abodes of the Supreme Lord. Only the devotees can enter into the Krishna Loka planet, which is Goloka Vrindavana, or the Vaikuntha planets. So those who worship the impersonal Brahmajyoti, they cannot enter into any of the planets there. They remain outside in the Brahmajyoti. the Brahmajyoti may be compared to the sunshine, and the spiritual planets may be compared to the sun itself. In the spiritual sky, the impersonalists remain in the effulgence of the Supreme Lord, the Brahmajyoti. So, of course, the Brahmajyoti is part of it. It originates from the transcendental effulgence of the Supreme Lord's body. So, it is still part of the spiritual world, but it is not the ideal destination like the Vaikuntha planets or Krishna Loka. The impersonalists are placed in the Brahmajyoti as spiritual sparks, and in this way, the Brahmajyoti is filled with spiritual sparks. This is what is meant by merging into the spiritual existence. It should not be considered that one merges into the Brahmajyoti in the sense of becoming one with it. The individuality of the spiritual spark is retained. The actual intention behind the desire of these impersonalists is that they want to merge into the Brahmajyoti and become one with it, but it is not possible. Even the impersonalists who get to enter into the Brahmajyoti, they will still retain their individual identity as a particle in the Brahmajyoti. So it should not be considered that one merges into the Brahmajyoti in the sense of becoming one with it. The individuality of the spiritual spark is retained. But because the impersonalist does not want to take a personal form, he is found as a spiritual spark in that effulgence. So the impersonalists do not get to enter into any of the planets like the Vaikuntha planets. Krishna Loka or Goloka Vrindana is also considered a Vaikuntha planet, but it is the topmost. So those who worship the original two-handed form of Krishna will enter Krishna Loka, and those who are more attracted to the 400 Narayana forms, they will enter into the other Vaikuntha planets where the Supreme Lord is present in the Narayana form. So this is the destination of the personalist devotees. On the contrary, the impersonalists, they get to enter into the Brahmajyoti, but there is no merging. The impersonalists do not get to merge into the Brahmajyoti. They merely enter into the Brahmajyoti, and still they remain as individual particles within the Brahmajyoti. So this is actually, the reality is contrary to their original desire. Just as the sunshine is composed of so many atomic particles, so the Brahmajyoti is composed of so many spiritual sparks. However, as living entities, we want enjoyment. So this is the trap into which the impersonalists are actually entering due to their desire of wanting to enter into the Brahmajyoti and denying the personal feature of the Supreme Lord. As living entities, we want enjoyment. Being in itself is not enough. We want bliss, Ananda, as well as being Sat. So we know that the three qualities of Sat, Chit, Ananda are originally from the Supreme Lord himself. And since we are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we have qualitative similarity with the Supreme Lord, and we also have these qualities in minute quantity. Those who enter impersonally into the Brahmajyoti can remain there for some time in full knowledge that they are now merged homogeneously with Brahman, but they cannot have that eternal Ananda bliss because that part is wanting. One may remain alone in a room for some time and may enjoy himself by reading a book or engaging in some thought, but it is not possible to remain in that room for years and years at a time, and certainly not for all eternity. So this is the condition of those who actually enter into the Brahmajyoti. They are forced to remain in this condition for a long time, which is contrary to our original nature, which is always wanting to have bliss. So those who enter into the Brahmajyoti, they are forced to remain as individual particles within the Brahmajyoti with this constant want for bliss. Compared to the personalist devotees, the personalist devotees have nothing to fear because they are entering into the Vaikuntha planets and they'll be able to enjoy association. So they'll always be experiencing bliss. But that element is lacking in the case of the impersonalists who have entered into the Brahmajyoti and they are forced to remain there as individual particles. Therefore, for one who merges impersonally into the existence of the Supreme, there is every chance of falling down again into the material world in order to acquire some association. Since the impersonalists are trapped, their desire was to merge into the Brahmajyoti in the name of liberation, but they are actually trapped as individual particles when they enter the Brahmajyoti. And their condition is such that they are not able to enjoy association and attain bliss because they, unlike the personalist devotees who manage to enter into the Vaikuntha planets, the impersonalists, they are still part of the spiritual world, but they are only trapped in the Brahmajyoti without any opportunity to enjoy any association. So they are always left with this constant want for association and bliss. So because of that, there's always the risk of them falling down again to the material world because their want for enjoyment is never fulfilled, since they are all trapped as individual particles in the Brahmajyoti without any opportunity to enjoy association and attain bliss. So that is the main risk association with the desire of wanting to enter into the Brahmajyoti. That's why the entire impersonalist conception is flawed, though it is still regarded as the first step or the first level in the 3 levels of realization of the absolute truth. But the Mayavadi school of thought, they regard this first level as the ultimate goal itself, and they'll have to be trapped in the Brahmajyoti as individual particles with no opportunity to enjoy any association and attain bliss. As a result, even after being able to enter into the spiritual world, they are still facing the risk of falling down because there's no opportunity to enjoy bliss, unlike the personalist devotees who get the chance to enter the Vaikuntha planets. This is the verdict of Srimad Bhagavatam. Astronauts may travel thousands and thousands of miles, but if they do not find rest on some planet, they have to return again to Earth. In any case, rest is required. In the impersonal form, rest is uncertain. Therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam says that even after so much endeavor, if the impersonalist enters into the spiritual world and acquires an impersonal form, he returns again into the material world because of neglecting to serve the Supreme Lord in love and devotion. So this is a privilege which is available only for the personalist devotees. Only the personalists are regarded as devotees because only the devotees who acknowledge the personal features of the Supreme Lord, only they are the ones who serve the Supreme Lord in love and devotion. Whereas the impersonalists, they deny the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, and because of that, they only end up entering the Brahmajyoti, and again that is also that is how the Supreme Lord himself reciprocates. The impersonal Brahmajyoti feature is also part of the Supreme Lord's features. It is a subset of the Bhagavan feature of the Supreme Lord. So in Gita 4.11, the Supreme Lord says, Ye yata mam prapadyante tam tateva bhajamyam mama vartman vartante manushya pata sarvasaha. As people surrender to me in different ways, I reward them accordingly. So those who worship only the impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord, they are also acknowledged by being given the opportunity to enter into the Brahmajyoti. But the risk has been explained here. Merely by entering into the Brahmajyoti, the impersonalists do not get any opportunity to enjoy association, and they'll always be having this want to attain bliss, which remains unfulfilled even after being liberated to the spiritual world. So this kind of liberation is not liberation at all, because it poses the risk of the impersonalists falling down again to the material world. But that is not the case with the personalist devotees. They get to enter into the Vaikuntha planets, and they can always enjoy the association with the Supreme Lord. They can attain devotional service towards the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. As long as we are here on earth, we must learn to practice to love and serve Krishna, the Supreme Lord. If we learn this, we can enter into those spiritual planets. The impersonalist position in the spiritual world is non-permanent. For out of loneliness, he will attempt to acquire some association. Because he does not associate personally with the Supreme Lord, he has to return again to the world and associate with conditioned living entities there. So, depending on the goal of every transcendentalist, the impersonalists are also regarded as transcendentalists. The personalist devotees are also regarded as transcendentalists. And the Supreme Lord rewards everyone equally according to their own desire. Now, since the personalist devotees, they express their desire to attain the spiritual world, to enjoy association with the Supreme Lord in direct devotional service to the Supreme Lord by worshipping the personal form of the Supreme Lord. So the Supreme Lord rewards the personalist devotees by elevating them to the Vaikuntha planets. However, in the case of impersonalists, since the impersonalists are always obsessed with this desire to merge into the Brahmajyoti, the Supreme Lord also facilitates them. But since they are the ones who want to enter into the Brahmajyoti, they get to enter into the Brahmajyoti and remain there as individual particles within the Brahmajyoti. And because of that, since they do not acknowledge the personal feature of the Supreme Lord, which is the topmost feature, the Bhagavan feature is the topmost feature in the 3 levels of realization of the absolute truth, but they fail to acknowledge that, and they do not worship that form. So because of that, they do get to enter into the Brahmajyoti, but they are forced to remain there as individual particles without any opportunity to enjoy association with the Supreme Lord. So because of that, that loneliness will create the feeling to want to enjoy association, and because of that, there is the risk of them falling down again into the material world. So this explanation regarding the risk of why impersonalists should not desire to merge into the Brahmajyoti. So this explanation is given in this chapter 2 of the book Beyond Birth and Death. Now back to chapter 3. By penances, austerities, and meditations, they can rise up to the platform of the Supreme Absolute But as has been explained, they again fall down to the material world because they have not taken Krishna's personal features seriously. Unless one worships the lotus feet of Krishna, he again has to descend to the material platform. So this we have just seen the elaborate explanation behind why the impersonalists are always at risk of falling down again, even after entering into the Brahmajyoti, which is part of the spiritual world. Still, they face the risk of falling down to the material world. The ideal attitude should be, I am your eternal servitor. Please let me somehow engage in your service. Krishna is called Ajita, unconquerable, for no one can conquer God. But according to Srimad Bhagavatam, one with this attitude easily conquers the Supreme. The one who has the submissive attitude of a servant can easily conquer the Supreme, who is Ajita or unconquerable. So throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, in all the cantos, we can clearly see that though it is described as Krishna Katha, the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, but the pastimes of the Supreme Lord also include his loving interactions with the topmost devotees. This we can clearly see in all the cantos. And we can clearly see how the one who is unconquerable was conquered by his topmost devotees. Even in the case of the Gita or in the episode of the Mahabharata, this explanation is also given in the purport of the last verse of the Gita in 18.78. So Bhagavan is described as, based on the definition by Parashara Muni, Bhagavan is the one who has all the 6 opulences in abundance. So what are the 6 opulences? Hare Krishna. Anyone can say what are the 6 opulences?
Fame,
Yeah.
beauty, wealth,
Yes.
knowledge, and renunciation.
Fame, wealth, beauty, strength, knowledge, renunciation. Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. So renunciation is also regarded as one of the 6 opulences. So why is it mentioned that the Supreme Lord has the opulence of renunciation? In which pastime do we see this opulence of renunciation by the Supreme Lord? Hare Krishna. Anyone else?
Come again, Babu?
In which pastime do we see the Supreme Lord exhibiting his opulence of renunciation?
With the 16,000 wives, Babu?
Opulence of renunciation.
Yeah.
Can I try, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu.
Ramayana?
Ramayana.
Chita?
No, I'm asking specifically about the opulence of renunciation.
Okay, bro.
Yeah, like what Prabhu said just now, in the Dwarka episode, so we can see that he was personally present in all the palaces. So through that, he exhibited his opulence of beauty and wealth, especially. But regarding the opulence of renunciation, it has been explained in the purport, in the Gita purport for the last verse in 18.78, about how the Supreme Lord exhibited the opulence of renunciation when he took up the role of the chariot driver. So I guess we know regarding why that is regarded as the opulence of renunciation. So despite having all those other 5 opulences in abundance, the Supreme Lord was willing to renounce his position for the love of his devotee. So the Supreme Lord was willing to take up the position of the chariot driver. So there's also this description about how one of the Brahmana was crying with his Gita copy, like he was telling Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about how he was crying because he could not accept the fact that the master of the universe took the position of a chariot driver for the love of his devotee. So that is the position in which he exhibited the opulence of renunciation. Despite having all the other 5 opulences in abundance, he also proved that he is able to renounce everything only for the love of his devotees. So even when both Arjuna and Duryodhana went to meet the Supreme Lord Krishna to ask for his support in the war, so the Supreme Lord said that I won't take part in the fighting, but one party can have my army and I'll assist the other party, though I will not personally fight. So Duryodhana simply wanted the army of Lord Krishna, but Arjuna wanted Lord Krishna to be personally present with him. Despite the assurance by Lord Krishna that he won't be fighting personally in the war, but still Arjuna, being such a loving devotee, he wanted Lord Krishna to be on his side, though Lord Krishna said that he will not personally fight in the war. So because of that, Lord Krishna was willing to take the position of the chariot driver. So that is also another example of how the love of Arjuna was able to conquer the unconquerable. And apart from that, there are also many other pastimes like Damodar Lila, and in almost every other pastime, we can easily see how the topmost devotees were able to conquer the unconquerable Supreme Lord through their loving devotion. Srimad Bhagavatam also recommends that we give up this futile process to measure the Supreme. We cannot even measure the limitations of space, what to speak of the Supreme. It is not possible to measure the length and breadth of Krishna by one's minuscule knowledge. And one who arrives at this conclusion is considered intelligent by Vedic literature. So, in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam itself, we can clearly see Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayat Itaratas Chartes Abhijñaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye Muhyanti Yat Suraya Tejo Vari Mridam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Amrishaha Damna Svena Sada Nirastakuakam Satyam Param Dhimahi. So in this verse, in the first verse itself, it is mentioned, O my Lord, Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primal cause of all causes of the creation, sustenance and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. So in this verse, in the first verse itself, in this part of the verse, it is stated, by him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire or land seen on water. So even the great sages, demigods, even Lord Brahma himself are not able to understand the Supreme Lord. So human beings should not even try to understand the should not claim that they have understood the transcendental attributes of the Supreme Lord. It is also mentioned by Arjuna in Gita 10.14 that neither the demigods or the demons could understand the complete attributes of the Supreme Lord. So that is what is mentioned here. We cannot even measure the limitations of space, what to speak of the Supreme. One should come to understand submissively that he is a very insignificant segment of the universe. Abandoning the endeavor to understand the Supreme by limited knowledge or mental speculation, we should become submissive and hear of the Supreme through authoritative sources such as the Bhagavad Gita or through the lips of a realized soul. So this is particularly important when we are endeavoring to understand spiritual knowledge because we have our 4 types of fallibilities. As human beings, we always have these 4 faults with us. What are they?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
We tend to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Always illusion. Senses
Yes.
are imperfect. We tend to
Mhm.
cheat. Hare Krishna.
Yes. Thank you, Ru. So these 4 faults, they are also known as Brahma Pramada, Vipralipsa, Karanapatva. So as Prabhu just mentioned, the 4 faults are the we are always in illusion. We tend to make mistakes. We also have the propensity for cheating, and we have imperfect senses. So that's why the so-called scientific knowledge, which is being imparted through the so-called academic institutions, we can clearly see that. I think I've given this example earlier also. Like when I was in school, during my school days, when we studied science, we were told that there are 9 planets, including Pluto. But since the year 2000 onwards, they declared that Pluto cannot be considered as a planet. So in the current syllabus, mostly in the science textbooks, they only include the list of 8 planets. But they say that this is progress. They say that this is new discovery. They will not acknowledge the fact that they fail to discover the truth. So they are simply going to cover up by saying that this is a new discovery. So we can clearly see in this so-called scientific process, which is conducted using the imperfect senses, there's always the tendency to make mistakes and also the propensity for cheating by saying that this is some new discovery without the ability to acknowledge or admit that they made the mistake in the first place. So this is what the so-called modern science is all about. But we have also seen from many of our earlier sessions that we as spirit souls, we can never solve our problems with this so-called modern scientific knowledge, which only helps us to become better than cats and dogs in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. We can only solve our problems through self-realization, we have, first of all, we have to realize that the self is the spirit soul. So to solve the problems of the spirit soul, we need spiritual knowledge. And that knowledge, unlike the so-called modern scientific knowledge, which is imparted by the so-called academic institutions, so we cannot employ the same methods which are employed in for those for imparting that kind of knowledge. We have to surrender to the authorities and refer to the authoritative sources because as mentioned earlier, since we are vulnerable with these four major faults, so we have to rely on the authentic scriptures to gain this spiritual knowledge. And from the Gita also, the Supreme Lord himself, he explains regarding what is regarded as true knowledge, especially particularly in this chapter from the Gita. In chapter 13 of the Gita, it begins with the questions by Arjuna. Arjuna is he specifically asked about 6 subject matters. He says that he wants to know about Prakriti Purusha, Kshetra Kshetrajna, Jnanam Jneyam. He is asking the Supreme Lord to explain about these six subject matters. Prakriti Purusha, Kshetra Kshetrajna, the field and the know of the field, Jnanam Jneyam, knowledge and the object of knowledge. So in this chapter, starting from the second verse onwards, the Supreme Lord replies by explaining each of the subject matters. So from verse 8 to 12 in the 13th chapter, the Supreme Lord provides explanation about 20 aspects of knowledge: humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So, from the Bhagavad Gita, we can clearly see about the definition of knowledge itself. In these verses, from verse 8 to 12 of the 13th chapter, the Supreme Lord is defining what is regarded as knowledge. So it should cover these 20 aspects. So let's rewind back to our school days. So anyone remembers being taught about these aspects, like the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, or accepting the importance of self-realization, philosophical search for the absolute truth? No, because in those so-called academic institutions, we were only taught about how we can become better than cats and dogs in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So that sort of so-called academic knowledge might be sufficient to fulfill our material needs, but it will never solve our problems as spirit souls. It can never solve our problems in this material world. So there are certain important aspects like perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So this appears in verse 9 of this chapter. Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. So a person who is regarded as a knowledgeable person, he should be able to perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So that's what the Supreme Lord is saying through this verse. Then apart from that, there are also the other aspects like approaching a bona fide spiritual master, Acharya Upasanam. And the concept of Acharya is clearly very different from the usual notion of a school teacher or a university lecturer, because Acharya is the one who leads by example. So there's also another verse in the Gita in 3.21. Lord Krishna says, Yajat acharati shreshtas tatta deve taro jana sayat pramanam kurte lokas tad vartate. So as a famous person leads by example, the others will follow. So particularly the role of an acharya is a much greater responsibility compared to any normal school teacher or a university lecturer, because in the case of our acharyas, like the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada himself, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So based on his requirement was that all his disciples were supposed to chant a minimum of 64 rounds, not less than that. 64 rounds every day. That was the minimum requirement that was set for his disciples. But him being the Acharya, he led by example, and based on what I heard from other lectures by other senior devotees, so according to them, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would chant for about 192 rounds every day. So the Acharya, he set a minimum requirement for the disciples, but his personal benchmark was much higher. So he led by example. That is the difference between Acharya and any other normal teacher. And apart from that, there are also other aspects like accepting the importance of self-realization. Has there been any emphasis about this concept of self-realization in our so-called academic institutions? No, we are only being taught about how we can further entangle ourselves with the obsession over material designations. So reducing our precious human form of life to that which is almost equal to the level of cats and dogs. So this is what we were being taught by the so-called academic institutions. But the Supreme Lord is making it very clear that only these 20 aspects are to be regarded as knowledge which can cure our material disease. We are spirit souls, so only these aspects can cure our material disease. And therefore, to acquire this spiritual knowledge, we have to surrender to the spiritual master and gain the knowledge which has been passed down through the bona fide parampara. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is hearing about God from the lips of Sri Krishna himself. In this way, Arjuna set the criterion for understanding the Supreme by submissive hearing. So we know that in the Gita, in the first chapter, it was largely a monologue by Arjuna. He was listing his reasons for not wanting to fight. And even in the second chapter, though the Supreme Lord starts to speak in the second verse of the second chapter, but he only begins by admonishing Arjuna, and he was admonishing Arjuna to motivate him to fight. But at one point in verse 2.7, Arjuna completely surrenders to the Supreme Lord. He says, Karpanya dosho padasvava prichami tam dharma samudaya cheta yatra yeshan nishchitam ruhi tanme sishyastiham sadimam tam prapannam. So in that verse, Arjuna completely surrenders to the Supreme Lord. So only after that, the actual discourse begins, the Supreme Lord starts to impart the transcendental teachings of the Gita from 2.11 onwards until 18.72. It is our position to hear the Bhagavad Gita from the lips of Arjuna or his bona fide representative, the spiritual master. After hearing, it is necessary to practice this acquired knowledge in daily life. My dear Lord, you are unconquerable, the devotee prays. But by this process, by hearing, you are conquered. God is unconquerable, but he is conquered by the devotee who abandons mental speculation and listens to authoritative sources. So it is not merely enough if we gain the knowledge, it should also translate into actions. According to the Brahma Samhita, there are two ways of acquiring knowledge, the ascending process and the descending process. By the ascending process, one is elevated by knowledge acquired by himself. In this way, one thinks, I don't care for any authorities or books, I will attain knowledge myself by meditation, philosophy, etc. In this way, I will understand God. So one analogy which is given regarding this process is regarding how the staircase to heaven was built. So that so-called ascending process is actually the useless process because it is all based on self-obsession without any regard for the authoritative sources and authoritative scriptures. It is also very prevalent in our community where people tend to always gather knowledge about the Bhagavad Gita from all other sources except the authentic sources of Bhagavad Gita, like Bhagavad Gita as it is. People tend to always gather knowledge about Bhagavad Gita from all sorts of WhatsApp forwards, but they do not study the authentic version of the Bhagavad Gita. So such processes which are regarded as the so-called ascending process will never result in enabling anyone to attain perfection. So something similar has been mentioned by Lord Krishna in 16.23. Yah shastra vidim usujya vartate kamakarta nasa siddhim avapnoti na sukham na param gatim. So those who simply act according to their whims without any regard.
Prabhu, your line is breaking. Prabhu, your line is not clear. Prabhu, your line is not clear, Prabhu. Your line is not clear, Prabhu. Breaking.
Oh.
Your speech or breaking. Not clear. Breaking. Okay, no.
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yeah, okay, Prabhu. I'm here, okay.
Okay. So in Gita 16.23, the Supreme Lord says, those who act according to their own whims and fancies without any regards to the scriptures, they can never attain perfection. So that's why this ascending process will not help us to attain perfection. The other process, the descending process, involves receiving knowledge from higher authorities. The Brahma Samhita states that if one takes to the ascending process and travels at the speed of mind and wind for millions of years, he will still end up not knowing. So this is the drawback of the ascending process, which can be regarded as useless, especially in the pursuit of spiritual knowledge. For him, the subject matter will remain elusive and inconceivable. But that subject matter is given in the Bhagavad Gita, Ananya Cheta. Krishna says to meditate on him without deviation from the path of devotional service in submission. For one who worships him in this way, Tasyaham Sulabha, I become easily available. This is the process. If one works for Krishna 24 hours a day, Krishna cannot forget him. By becoming submissive, he can attract the attention of God. As Guru Maharaja Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati used to say, don't try to see God. Is God to come and stand before us like a servant just because we want to see him? That is not the submissive way. We have to oblige him by our love and service. So we can clearly see from the attitude of the so-called rationalists and atheists who often say, okay, if God really exists, show me where is God. So that itself is a major impediment or obstacle which obstructs any opportunity for them to progress spiritually, because despite being trapped in this material world with all the already existing material contamination, so these so-called intellectuals, they say that, okay, if God really exists, show him, otherwise I'm not willing to believe. So again, it is their ego which takes precedence with all the already existing material contamination. So they are thinking that God is so cheap to simply dance to their tunes. So that will never enable anyone to progress in spiritual life, as what Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says. We have to oblige him by our love and service. So I think we'll continue this part in the next session. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Sir, just now my internet cut off. Is it will be in the YouTube
Yeah, it's live streaming.
recording?
It will be
Okay.
available. Yeah.
Okay, just now my internet cut off already. I couldn't hear the side. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.